Again, welcome everyone and good morning. I'd like to welcome you to this ETI Insights webinar series on mined minerals and metals. This webinar has been made possible with the support of the Initiative for Global Solidarity, IGS, implemented by GISS on behalf of the German Federal Ministry for Economic Cooperation and Development, BMZ. For those who do not know me, my name is Melissa Caradonna, and I am the Purchasing Practices Program Lead at the Ethical Trading Initiative. So for those who, if you're not familiar with the Ethical Trading Initiative, we are a membership organization that was founded in 1998. You might know it from the ETI base code, which is widely used in workplaces around the world. We are a human rights organization, but I think what makes us unique is that we operate as a tripartite body, bringing together companies, NGOs, and trade unions. By working together, we tackle some of the biggest challenges in global supply chains. Our role is really to provide our members with practical advice, guidance, and support to help them implement human rights due diligence. And this work is closely aligned with the UN Guiding Principles on Business and Human Rights and the increasing amount of human rights legislation. But beyond that, ETI is also a safe space, basically a place where members can come together, share challenges, and collaborate to address like deeper systemic issues that drive human rights risks in supply chains. Just a couple of housekeeping points for today. Please be aware that today's session is being recorded, and we will make the recording publicly available on the ETI website in the next few days, meaning that today we will not follow Chatham House rule. I'm sure that most of you are familiar with Zoom webinar, but just as a reminder, you'll find the chat function at the bottom of your screen. Please feel free to use any questions, ask any questions, share your reflections throughout this session. So a quick overview of today's agenda. We will start by sharing some of the key learnings from the recent research on HRDD in mined minerals and metals conducted by ETI. And following that, we will move into a panel discussions, then give you some room to ask you some questions to the panelists, and then we will end with closing remarks and next steps. So now moving on to the key learnings from our research on mined minerals and metals. So I think many of you know that mining industries are often linked to serious human rights risks and violations. Things like land grabs, environmental destruction, forced and child labor, unsafe working conditions, and restrictions to freedom of association. And for years, like civil society organizations, indigenous communities, and global policymakers have been calling for like stronger protection in the mining sector. Many civil society organizations and think tanks have been at the forefront in holding brands and companies accountable and pushing for meaningful change. So these issues aren't new, but with the demand of critical minerals rising as the world is transitioning to a greener energy, greener world, the need for action is more urgent than ever. And businesses that rely on these materials and minerals are under growing pressure to strengthen their due diligence and take real steps to address these risks. Responsible supply chains aren't just about compliance, they're about like protecting the people who make them possible. And a just transition means ensuring that workers and their communities are not left behind in the shift to a sustainable energy. Companies have clear responsibility to identify and prevent human rights abuses in their supply chain, and the UN Guiding Principles on Business and Human Rights make this clear, that due diligence isn't optional, it's really essential. So, but today I will not be focusing on the important work that is already done to highlight human rights violations in mining industries. Instead, I will be explaining what ETI has been doing in this area. So how did we get started? In 2023, ETI launched an initiative on responsible purchasing practices in manufacturing industries. And this was a 20-month project funded by IGS and GIZ and supported by BMZ, which brought together 18 companies from various sectors, including stone industry, construction, renewables, electric vehicles, beauty, home accessories. So very diverse group of sectors. And the goal was to assess and improve purchasing practices. A key part of this was gathering supplier feedback through surveys to evaluate how business purchasing decisions impact both suppliers and workers, which is really essential towards responsible sourcing. But not all companies found it really easy to participate in the supplier surveys. Some struggled because they had like weak relationships with their suppliers. They either didn't know them well or didn't really have direct contact with them. Others had limited influence over their suppliers or weren't fully clear on how to manage risks deeper in their supply chain. These challenges were especially common in industries like renewable energy, electric vehicles, construction, and steel, sectors that rely heavily on mined minerals and metals and often source from high-risk regions. But yet, despite this dependence, many companies face challenges in risk management in supply chain. And to help address these challenges, ETI carried out a rapid human rights due diligence risk assessment to identify like where the most common challenges are, opportunities for improvement, and for providing companies with recommendations. And for that, we have been engaging with 8 companies, all members from the Ethical Trading Initiative, Ethical Trade Norway, Ethical Trade Denmark, Ethical Trade Sweden, and the research focus on assessing their maturity and capacity to identify and mitigate upstream human rights risks. In addition to evaluating these 8 companies, we have also consulted with external experts in the field. The assessment involved 2 online surveys and followed by in-depth interviews. And the research was not really meant to provide full assessment of HRDD processes across these industries. It instead aimed to really review different companies' approaches and identify like recurring trends that require further exploration. So let's take a closer look at the challenges of this research. So just popping these up a bit. Limited transparency beyond tier 1. So many companies don't really have a clear visibility of their suppliers' practices beyond the first tier. And this makes it harder to gather important information about potential human rights issues in supply chains. Downstream companies often have very limited control over mining operations, especially when there are several tiers removed. So suppliers at different levels struggle to assess lower tier operations due to contractual limits and lack of leverage. Opportunities to integrate responsible sourcing are often missed, especially if buyers lack like the knowledge or the resources for effective due diligence. Even when human rights risks are found, enforcing changes can be tough because of this limited leverage or resistance from suppliers over cost or infrastructure concerns. Also challenges with supply chain mapping. So information about the supply chain is often spread across different departments or different companies, making it harder to get like a full and accurate picture. Also, many suppliers, particularly in mining industries, are reluctant to share details due to business secrecy or lack of regulations. Geographic fragmentations, what we saw was that supply chains are spread out across different regions. So, for example, a company like in Europe might buy a product for China, which relies on material from another country, which are ultimately sourced from mines in yet another country. Limited traceability is really difficult for companies to track the origin of raw materials. Inconsistent regulations, so different countries have different rules when it comes to responsible sourcing, making it harder for companies to follow best practices. Lack of internal capacity and buy-in, so companies often struggle because departments like procurement or legal or sustainability don't always work together on sourcing issues. It takes time and resources and strong leadership to align everyone. And some companies don't even have like dedicated teams in place to address these challenges. And then lastly, limited pressure from consumers and business partner. What we saw was that many companies really looked at sell primarily to like other businesses and not directly to consumers. And as a result, they don't face as much public pressure about their supply chain. So projects like electric vehicles don't get as much attention from human rights issues compared to clothing. Plus, there is an assumption that if a product is green, it is socially responsible, which is not always the case. So while we identified some challenges, we also obviously identified some opportunities for companies to improve their practices. Here you can see listed a few. So one was understanding and mapping your supply chain. So companies can start by mapping their tier 1 suppliers and prioritizing them based on risk and relationship. The focus should be on like high risk minerals and materials and regions, using insights from like experts, trade unions and NGOs. Building stronger relationship also helps sharing responsibility for human rights risk. Also investing in better tools and partnership helps gather again more data and reduce risks across supply chains. Partnership and industry collaboration. So companies can have a bigger impact by working together in industry-wide initiatives, sharing knowledge, collaborating with suppliers, and pooling resources for like cost-effective solutions can drive more responsible practices across the mining industry. A bottom-up approach to HRDD. So engaging with like local communities and workers are essential. A bottom-up approach ensures that strategies align with community needs and local expertise. And this again then helps identify risks and promote long-term sustainability, gaining community ownership and commitment to human rights. And then lastly, building internal capacity. So companies must continue investing in their internal resources and leadership to strengthen their understanding of human rights due diligence in challenging supply chains. So I think as these supply chains change, it is also important to keep improving and building knowledge. Companies should also develop clear strategies for engaging or disengaging with suppliers, including procedures for addressing risks. So really identifying risks are key, but also having systems in place that respond consistently is also just important. So recommendations, and so based on the the opportunities we just have mentioned, here are also some recommendations. I will not go through them all because we have a very expert panel that will dive into this a bit more detailed. But a few ones that I wanted to take out is like, just start simple and focus on what you can do rather than what you can't do. So begin mapping your supply chain and assessing risks at every level. Working together with industry peers to strengthen your efforts. So engage with sector initiatives, sustainability platforms, and multi-stakeholder collaborations to enhance like your leverage and improve efficiency in addressing supply chain risks. And then lastly, partner with trade unions, civil society organizations, and local communities to ensure that the voices of rights holders are included when identifying and addressing risks. So their involvement is really critical in ensuring like the effectiveness and the relevance of your design strategies. So I will going to pass over to my colleague George and the panelists. We will share with some like real world examples how we can work together to tackle some of these challenges. Handing the floor over to George now.
Thanks, Melissa. I hope everybody can hear me okay and see me too. My camera is on, so I think I should start coming through on your screen quite soon. So I am the Just Transitions Advisor at the Ethical Trading Initiative, and it's a real pleasure to be with everybody today. Thank you, Melissa, for outlining and summarizing some of the key findings and recommendations from this very rapid research that we've been undertaking. So we have an expert panel with us today to answer some questions. We have, let's start with Jeroen. So Jeroen Hoff works at Connect Bus. And Connect Bus is a Nordic bus company, quite a large one, almost 4,000 employees and over 2,000 vehicles on the road. Connect Bus are a member of Ethical Trade Norway, and Jeroen is the Chief Sustainability Officer and Head of Health, Safety, Environment and Quality. So a wonderfully long job title, and it's a great pleasure to have you with us today, Jeroen, and we're looking forward to hearing your insights. We also have with us today Cecilia from the Centre for Child Rights and Business. Cecilia has worked at the centre since 2023, so just 2 years. She's the Director of Services for Europe, Africa and the Americas. So she works very closely with the centre's partners and clients, which include many major businesses sourcing mined minerals and metals around the world. And they work collaboratively to ensure positive impacts for children that are linked to and living in contexts where many of these minerals and metals are being sourced. We also have with us today Maurice van Beers from CNV International. So CNV International is a Dutch organization. I'm sure many of you are familiar with them. And they partner with trade unions all around the world, across Africa, Asia, and Latin America, including trade unions active in the mining and minerals sectors. And Maurice also has a wonderfully long job title. He is the Just Transitions Expert and the Coordinator for Latin America. So thank you, Maurice, for joining us today. Thank you to all of our panelists. So what we're going to do is we've pre-prepared a few questions that we would like to put to our panelists that hopefully bring to life some of the findings and the recommendations that Melissa has already outlined. We're using this Zoom webinar function, and you should be able to see at the bottom of your screen a little button for Q&A. So as you are listening to the discussion, please feel free to use the Q&A function to ask any questions that you have, and we will do our best to answer those, but also to share your reflections and your thoughts. I know that we have a very well-informed audience with us today, so no doubt there's a huge amount of wisdom and insight that we can all learn from our audience members too. So please do comment using the Q&A function as much as you can. So let us get on with this without too much further ado. I'm going to start with you, Jeroen. I think I can see you on my screen. Yes, that's great. So we're really keen to kind of hear that business perspective. I think it's really important to ground any discussion in the kind of practical realities of what it's like to be managing these risks in live supply chains in the business community. So Melissa has outlined many of the challenges that we see when it comes to conducting human rights due diligence in these supply chains of mined minerals and metals. And she's also set out some of the recommendations that have flowed through from this research that we've been undertaking over the last few months. We're really keen to hear from the experience of Connect Bus. When you started working on this issue of human rights due diligence in your supply chains, going back to mined minerals and metals, we're really keen to hear from you. You know, what was the biggest challenge that you encountered as Connect Bus? And in terms of those recommendations that Melissa set out, which one for you feels like the best starting point? What would you recommend other businesses use as the best starting point for getting started on this work?
Thanks for a wonderful introduction, George, and apologies for the long job title and for my voice. I have a little cold today. But to get back to your questions, I would say some of the main challenges that we have seen is in a way the combination of a lot of pressure from the Nordic governments and our Nordic customers to provide zero emission vehicles on the market, and at the same time major concerns about the social responsibility aspects related to the industry in which we operate. And this is causing a lot of pressure on us as an operator who's sitting in the middle of these various forces in the market. So on one hand, we need to provide electrical vehicles, and on the other hand, everybody wants a guarantee that these electrical vehicles will not lead to any human rights issues. And that's a pretty impossible position to occupy, as you will understand. And this is closely related to another key issue or a key challenge for us, which also Melissa mentioned, which is the complexity of the supply chains, and also the conflict of with regard to people's expectations. They see a bus and they ask us, okay, where does the bus come from? Where is it made? And then we need to start explaining that the bus has actually got 50,000 components, which all and that there probably are about 100 sub-suppliers involved, which all have their own supply chains, going all the way down to raw materials and minerals and materials used in the various processes. We also need to point out that some European buses might have more, for example, Chinese components than a Chinese bus might have, which might have more European components. So there's a lot of complexities and there, and knowledge is also a key challenge, both for ourselves. We need to build up more and more knowledge about our supply chains, about the risks related to our supply chains. And also we need to, in a way, work together with other bus operators, with our customers, to increase the knowledge and expertise around these topics, which also, in a very large degree, still are very new for us. And maybe as a final challenge to mention is that there's also a lot of cultural aspects here. So from a European point of view, we tend to have a certain perspective on other countries, which like China or Egypt or Turkey, which in a large degree is quite negative and has a lot of skepticism. And when you visit these producers, as I've done last year, there's a very different picture there. So, for example, these Chinese producers have a very different perspective on human rights, where we are more focused on individual cases. They are more focused on groups and the society as a whole, and the developments that occur on that level, which creates a challenge. And also, I would say, finally, from my side, the challenges are that we tend to risk assess on a geographical level, and while we have to deal with suppliers, and it's very tricky to assess an individual supplier based on their geographical location, especially if that individual supplier is actually a world-leading company, both with regards to sales and technological innovation. So that also creates a challenge when you open a discussion on high-risk perspectives, for example. And with regards to the recommendations that Melissa made, I would say that the membership of Ethical Trade Norway has really helped us with regards to many of these challenges, to get more knowledge, access to more expertise, and a network of people that have worked in with these issues related to human rights for much longer than we have ourselves.
Brilliant. Thank you so much for sharing those challenges so honestly, Jeroen. We really appreciate that. And I think you do point to the central challenge, right? In just transition, we need to make this energy transition, but we need to do it in a way that is both environmentally sustainable and respects the human rights of both workers and communities. And that is a complex challenge. So yeah, really appreciate your honesty on that, and yeah, recognize the progress that you've made as an organization. It's really impressive. So maybe I'll jump across now to Maurice. So perhaps building on this a little bit, as Melissa said, one of the central challenges that's been identified through this research is the very limited traceability in these supply chains, going all the way back to what are potentially kind of tier 3, 4, 5 mining sites for key transition and critical minerals and metals. But I know that this is a topic that is not new to CNV. You've been working on this for many years. So what recommendations would you make to companies to improve the transparency in these supply chains that they're dependent upon, and that, as Jeroen has already explained, are very complex by nature?
Thank you, George. And let me start with thanking also for organizing this webinar, because I think it's very good to address the issue of just transition related with mining. And it's an upcoming issue. I think Jeroen rightly mentioned that there are every day more questions from the public on that the fair and green transition also has to be a fair transition. So it's good to start addressing those issues. We have a global dedicated program on mining minerals, on transition minerals, you could say, working in countries like Indonesia, South Africa, Bolivia, Colombia, and Peru. On different metals, on different minerals, like copper, like nickel, like zinc, tin, and others. And one of the things that we should, we recommend on starting, which is coming from our experience, because we are a Dutch organization, Dutch trade union organization, but we work together with the unions in the mining sites themselves. So we see both sides of the supply chain, you could say. And one of the things is that's also a strength you could use. So if you're a company and you're interested in like, how do I get by all those fragmented, which Melissa already mentioned, and also are in your very good report, if you want to overcome these challenges, which are quite serious, one of the things you can do is start from both sides. Our experience, for example, we work with 3 companies in Bolivia and Peru, Tata Steel, Nystar, and Wupperman, which are big metal companies. And we saw, for example, in Bolivia, that it's quite difficult to understand the supply chain. And what you see over there is that there's one major company that's buying all the different metals from the different mines. And then, although you cannot really like have a clear view on what's coming from which mine, you can say that's, well, but at least it's coming through this major state-owned mining company. And that makes it also like you have a channel to say, okay, that is where we go start the conversation, for example, or where we try to help on, try to find help to clear out where minerals are coming from, or addressing some of the issues that you're finding. So that's one way of doing this. And also, if you start from upstream, the stakeholders, companies, but also unions, other entities, they know they can put data on the table, and they like you can make the puzzle complete from that side, and from the other side, the companies downstream can start working on where their what they know from their suppliers, for example. And that's a way of trying to connect both sides. In the case of Bolivia, for example, that worked. And we are able to say right now that some serious challenges, we can work on those and start working with a collective action plan to address, for example, issues like occupational health and safety, but also like forced and child labor, for example, which are taking place in those supply chains. So that on the recommendation, I would say, so don't be like, continue, be optimistic that it is possible, and try to start to work your way from both sides. And use organizations like, for example, not like ours, international working organizations with contacts with local stakeholders, because that's really something which makes it more easy for companies to make those connections. For example, we have like a 4-step approach. We sit down first in the first step with companies or a group of companies to see like what's the panorama looks like. Then next step is rolling out with our Fair Work Monitor a survey, recollecting labor rights data through unions in the mines themselves, and then sit down together afterwards, making analysis, which is joint and participatory with the unions, but also with companies and the mining companies alike, to see which are the main priorities. And based on this, to agree on some steps you can you can make or you should make improving the labor rights situation. And then afterwards continue to monitoring if there's any progress. So in that sense, you have some real impact quickly. You have contact with the stakeholders, the rights holders you have to be talking to. And also you can write down in your report the progress on the impact that's being made. So it seems like a very harsh panorama, complicated, fragmented supply chains, but there are ways to work around those. So that would be my recommendation. I can continue talking for hours, George, but you know that you told me that I have just a little minute, so I'll leave it.
Sorry, yeah, we do have to be strict, but we will come back to you, Maurice, to hear a bit more. But yeah, completely agree. This was one of the themes that was coming through quite strongly in the research, that yes, there are huge challenges around traceability and transparency, but there are organizations out there who are expert in beginning, as Maurice says, to kind of piece the different pieces of the puzzle together, working from both ends and increasing the transparency. It might not be perfect, but progress can be made. And CNV International is one organization that is showing how to make that progress. So thanks, Maurice. Maurice mentioned some of the Latin American countries where him and his team are very active, but we want to jump continents now and come to you, Cecilia. You've been very patient, thank you. I say jump continents because I know that the Center for Child Rights and Business is doing some really inspirational work in the Democratic Republic of Congo, particularly the southeastern region, and working very directly in mining communities and specifically with small scale and artisanal miners mining cobalt, which of course we know is a very high profile mineral, and this is a very high profile part of the world these days, sadly not always for hugely positive reasons. But it's great to have you with us, Cecilia, so thanks for joining us. Would you kind of talk us through a little bit how you approach this issue of or this challenge of transparency in mining supply chains, specifically cobalt from the DRC, and what approach do you take at the Center for Child Rights and Business?
Thank you so much, George. Yeah, I think I probably want to kind of resonate a little bit what Maurice was just saying, that I believe that, I mean, we all recognize the complexity of transparency and traceability, but we believe that the lack of transparency doesn't remove the responsibility to act. And I think many of us know when we start to do this mapping that Jeroen also spoke about where the mines are located. And also what risks are associated. So if we take then the example of the Democratic Republic of Congo and cobalt, that is a very, it's a mineral that is very, it's largely mined in DRC. So 70% of cobalt globally comes from DRC. And it's estimated that 10 to 30% come from ASM mining, which we all know is connected to many human rights issues, not the least the worst forms of child labor. And I think here with the complexity of the supply chain, and also knowing that minerals and are mixed along the supply chain in collection points or smelters, we believe that companies along these supply chains, independently of having full traceability and transparency, ought to assume that they are connected to ASM mining in DRC if they have cobalt in their products. So I think a little bit with your recommendations, right? Of course, we can get lost in complexity, but potentially our call is that let's not wait to resolve that, but focus on where we know risks and act. And I think what we then see from many of the companies and organizations we work with is that the next challenge for many companies is then how to address these risks in upstream supply chains, where in a meaningful way, considering then that they have very little leverage and also, of course, potentially linked to the sourcing volume. And again, if we look at the situation in DRC, the latest estimate from the government when it comes to this region, where most of the cobalt come from, they estimated that there is at least 5,000 children in child labor. Based on the research we have done, we believe the numbers are much higher than that. And of course, this can feel rather overwhelming for an individual company. What can I do, considering the scale of the issue and also the complexity? And of course, I think, again, mirroring what Maurice just said, is very much, of course, about collaboration. No individual company can address this issue alone, but if enough actors come together, we believe that actually this issue in DRC Congo with child labor can largely be resolved within a decade, or that we will have actually meaningful structures in place to prevent and remediate child labor. So I think that comes into then what we have done over the last year. So I think the Center, for those of you who knows us, we're a social enterprise, been active in the area of child rights and business for soon 15 years. And I think it is around since 5 years back that that companies came to us with questions around mined minerals and critical raw materials. We also have a lot of experiences, over 10 years of experience working with child labor remediation and prevention in tier 1, where companies very easily can see the link to situations of child labor. And we have many of our clients coming to us and say, you know, couldn't you come up with a solution for upstream supply chain, but these linkages are not so clear, because we're working actually on addressing, remediating child labor and preventing child labor. So this is how actually the Hub for Child Labor Prevention and Remediation in DRC came about. So we initiated the project in 2022. Funded by the Fair Cobalt Alliance that works with formalization of ASM mining in DRC, and also supported by Save the Children Germany. So that was a pilot project that led to a new association, a bottom-up structure being created in 2024. So we have now established the Hub as a local non-for-profit association in DRC, together with 6 local civil society organizations. And through education and capacity building, we now have 31 approved case managers, out of which 20 currently are managing and remediating 46 child labor cases connected to ASM mining. And up until today, we have directly supported 53 children and indirectly over 200 children, and through support of a growing number of organizations and companies. Our target for this year is at least 100 children directly supported, and also to initiate more initiatives on the ground on prevention in the communities where we work. So I think we recognize the complexity. We recognize that many of the companies here today, organization, they may have a very small part, a small volume of cobalt or and complexity. But I think what we say is that if we can come together and collaborate in this way, and that's what we're now trying to create, we can drive meaningful change on the ground and address child labor. Yeah, I think that's our response to the efforts so far.
Brilliant, thank you, Cecilia. That's yeah, really super to hear those details, and it sounds like progress is being made, and yeah, the challenge is the big one in terms of the numbers of children involved in the ASM sector in DRC, but it's not insurmountable, as you say, through the right level of collaboration. And I jotted down in my notebook here as you were speaking a few key points, but one of the things that you said right at the beginning, which I thought was very powerful, was that the lack of transparency in the supply chain doesn't remove the responsibility for stakeholders to act. And I think that's a really important point there. So maybe picking up on this theme of kind of collaboration and partnership a little bit, and returning to you, Jeroen, I wondered if you could tell us a little bit more. You did touch on this already, but tell us a little bit more about, you know, pre-competitive collaboration that you've been able to kind of participate in through your membership at Ethical Trade Norway, and how important that has been for your business.
Well, it's hard to rate it, but I would say it's quite important. I already mentioned knowledge, and more specifically a lack of knowledge as a key challenge here. In Norway, we have the Transparency Act in place for the 3rd year running now, which is a very new legislation related to sustainable practices in the supply chain. We have the HRDD legislation, as everybody here is aware of, in place now, which are all very new, creating new questions and many challenges for us. And the membership in Ethical Trade Norway has helped us in both processes, I would say. They have developed, for example, a tool. They have guidance available on the Transparency Act. That was the start for us. That was a key reason for us to become a member. And it has just ensured that the process has been, I would say, mostly much more effective instead of us guessing our way forward through this new legislation. We have been able to interact with people that have been involved in the creation of the legislation, and therefore have a much more in-depth understanding of the goals behind the legislation, and yeah, therefore the way in which we should be thinking and working. It also gives us a possibility to track our progress, as you are rated in this in the reporting tool on various levels, which is also very helpful for us. So I would say that would be the obvious advantage of becoming a member. And secondly, I would say the network that these organizations provide, that allows us to come into contact with people like Cecilia and Maurice, which is hugely beneficial for us as we're trying to make sense of this complex value chain with all its various aspects and challenges. And in our case, Ethical Trade Norway has specifically set up a battery forum with other companies that also are hugely reliant on electrical vehicles, and especially on electrical batteries, and that can discuss with Chatham House rules the complexities that we all face. And by raising these complexities and discussing them and hearing from others how they cope with these challenges is usually hugely beneficial for us as well. So that's I think that's a key point. And looking forward, I would say that I'm very hopeful that organizations like Ethical Trade Initiative or Ethical Trade Norway will also help us to make all these human rights due diligence processes much more efficient. Because today's situation is one of chaos and usually ineffective use of resources. Where, for example, all bus operators in Scandinavia are now, in a way, forced to send ESG teams to various countries throughout the world to inspect exactly the same facility with almost exactly the same checklist. Then we send out third-party audit companies to do an ESG audit, and everybody does that for themselves. There's no sharing of these audit reports. And just to have a central organization that would coordinate those kinds of efforts would make the situation much more efficient, both for us in Europe, but also for our suppliers. And in total, it would just make public transportation more accessible and cheaper because of reduced costs.
Thank you. Yeah, really important points there. We mustn't repeat the mistakes of audit fatigue as we roll out human rights due diligence across these supply chains, and this legislation strengthens on that front. And I liked what you said about getting together at Ethical Trade Norway and just having the discussion and putting the issues on the table there. One of our colleagues from the trade union movement always emphasizes that everything starts with a conversation, and I think that's very true. On that note, and I am running slightly behind time, so Maurice, I'm going to have to be very strict with you here. Just 1 minute. In terms of this point about collaboration, how important is collaboration with the trade union movement?
Very important, George.
Can you expand on that for 30 seconds? Why is it so important?
Okay. If you want to avoid like auditing fatigue and checking boxes and all those kinds of procedures, it's very important that you also go towards impact. And you cannot achieve this without working with trade unions in the mining sites themselves. They are the people, they are the organization that know what's happening. And also where the solutions is, because that's important. Not only what's the problem, but also what is the solution. So, for example, I told you in the first round about our approach to work with the Fair Work Monitor, recollecting data. we do this like an offer to help companies to make this impact and to go towards their supply chain, the upstream part. But what happens then? We sit down and make a collective action plan with the unions locally. And for example, in Peru, Bolivia, that's about occupational health and safety, about heat stress, about dust and gases in the mine itself, which should be dealt with. So that's
Maurice, I'm going to cut you off there.
Okay.
But that was brilliant, thank you. And I think
Okay.
I think what you're pointing to is the fact that when you start these conversations, collaborations with the trade union movement, what you get to very quickly are these very tangible issues, as you say, heat stress, occupational health and safety, dust, and so on. And I think your earlier point is really very important about impact, right? So sometimes we get a bit caught up in this language of risks and managing risks, but ultimately this is also about making change and improving working conditions, and that is an impact. And we simply cannot do that without the trade union movement. So thank you. Cecilia, jumping to you again, just 1 minute for you. One of the things that we found most fascinating about talking to your colleagues from the centre about all this work in the DRC is the fact that you're the Centre for Child Rights and Business, and yet your work expands a lot beyond child rights to other labour rights and human rights issues. Can you just tell us in 1 minute why that is so important and what are the connections there?
So I think the approach that we take to child labor remediation is one that tackles the root causes of child labor, but also a long-term approach. I think that it's key to remember. There are many efforts out there that may primarily focus on just removing a child from a situation of child labor. What very often happens then is that the same child appears in another situation of child labor, perhaps in another mine the next week or next month. Or that they may just be supported in their schooling for 1 year, but then when the fund is over, what happens then? So I think the way we work is that we work with each child and we create a remediation plan for that child that is built on their needs and root causes. We also follow the child until they reach the legal age of working, which in the DRC is 16. We also compensate for the lost income that the child had, and we work also actively with the family to find, a viable way forward, because of course we do not want these children to return to child labor once our program is over. So it's really to actively work both with the child, but also the context in which the child finds themselves in, notably the family. So I think that is where probably the overlap with other human rights or labor rights issues are coming into play. So that could be looking into alternative livelihoods, opportunities for the families, access for decent work for youth is one aspect of this, right? Gender-related concerns. And of course, we also see that some of the root causes of child labor is that their working parents have ended up in a work accident, for example, and lost income, right? So there you have also the connection to, for example, a formalization effort. One of our key funders is FCA. So I think there are a lot of overlaps when you work with child rights, also to the broader labor rights of working parents. But thank you so much. I think that was a little bit over 1 minute.
No, that was great. That was great. I mean, I think one of the things that we found so fascinating was this approach that sees child labor and child rights abuses as symptoms of deeper contextual structural factors that also need to be addressed. And, that example of working parents who've had accidents due to poor health and safety conditions where they work, driving child labor, again, is a very tangible issue and links perhaps back to what Maurice was talking about in terms of working with trade unions.
Yeah, the remediation and the prevention is very connected, right? So absolutely.
So just in the interest of time, my colleague Kate has been very helpfully sending through a few questions that have come in from participants and audience members today, which is great. We're not going to have time to answer them all, but just picking one of them out here, which I think is quite an important one in terms of our focus on business practices and HRDD within supply chains. And perhaps I'll put this one to Jeroen first of all. Do you have recommendations in terms of the kind of requirements and specifications or recommendations that are put to suppliers in your procurement that prevent some of these risks or reduce some of these risks? Be interested to hear the Connect Bus experience there. You talked about the complexity of this, but are there specific things that you put into, say, contracts or on the table in discussions when you're onboarding a new supplier?
I would say my main recommendation would be to avoid too much box ticking and sending out online questionnaires that you want to receive signed in return. In my experience, there's of course this in a way for a company an easy way to solve a complex issue, but you don't really solve the issue. You just make sure that you have a paper that you can show to your customer that you have taken an action. So I would really recommend going into in a dialogue, and of course this will be different for every market and the supply chain. But I would strongly recommend to go into a dialogue and focus on building a longer term relationship where you're trying to understand the context of your suppliers, and where you also try to explain the context of your own organization and why are we asking these questions, and how can we solve these issues in the best possible manner. So
Yeah,
I would
I think
really,
that's great.
underline going into a dialogue, maybe involve other experts to make sure that you're focusing on the right issues, and also, I would say.
No, that's fantastic. Thank you.
That could be a longer, but I would say focus on the dialogue and not on the box ticking.
Yeah, great summary. Yeah, avoid box ticking as much as possible and build long-term partnerships based upon genuine dialogue. Great, thank you. Another question that's come through is quite an interesting one. So we often refer to the tiers in supply chains, and I talked at the beginning about, I think, tier 3, 4, 5. And questions come through, which I think is a good challenge. You know, is there really such a thing as neat tiers in these kind of supply chains that are reliant on mined minerals and metals? And maybe I'll put this one to Maurice. With that in mind, you know, how should brands begin the mapping journey? Just 30 seconds for you, Maurice.
You're so strict, George.
I try to be, but it's hard.
I would say, I will repeat what I already mentioned. The recommendation is start on both sides. And that may sound like strange, but like Cecilia was mentioning, for example, in Congo, you know that the main part of cobalt is coming from there. If you're talking about copper, you know where it's coming from. So you can already focus and then contact, for example, through a wonderful initiative like ETI itself or other MSIs or benchmarks, or try to collaborate with other peers, trying to find out those contexts you need in those countries. And of course, organizations like ourselves can help with this. So that would be my recommendation. Start on both sides, making the mapping of what's happening and who's there and who can you collaborate with. And then, like Jeroen said, I'm a unionist, dialogue. With those.
Brilliant. Yeah, I mean, I think this is a really valid point, right? Maybe these supply chains don't separate out into neat tiers, but nonetheless, they have in effect two ends. And as you say, Maurice, we can start at either end and start to work towards the middle, and that brings a lot of transparency and new information. But just picking up on another question that's come in, and this will be the last one, so I promise we'll give you a break now, well, shortly. So, I mean, we've mentioned and we've emphasized the role of trade unions, and Maurice has articulated that very well. But, you know, a genuine challenge has come through on the Q&A there, which sometimes unions in parts of the world can be very weak. I don't know if this is something that you've experienced, Cecilia, in the DRC or other regions of the world where the centre is active. What do you do in those contexts where actually unionization level is low and or the capacity of local trade unions is quite limited? What would be your recommendations as the centre?
Now taking kind of a step back, I mean, what we see in many, of course, upstream supply chains, if there is mine minerals or others, of course, that it's a large informal sector. I think we are working, of course, with artisanal small-scale miners, right? That's completely informal. So there is no real opportunity for union to be active in that. There is more cooperatives or those which of course are supporting negotiation, etc. So of course we are not working with that, but of course we are working, as I mentioned before, in collaboration with the Fair Cobalt Alliance that supports formalization of artisanal and small-scale mining. That's their objective. Because I think when we talk about the just transition here, I think one also needs to have in mind that there are the large big companies coming in and you know, having these large pit mines. They may not employ the local people, or it's a small portion, right? A lot of engineers from abroad. So I think what you see in some of these countries is as well that where there has been artisanal small-scale mining for decades, right? That they are kind of being excluded from the formal supply chains. And that is not the solution for a just transition. So I do think we need to work in parallel here. Of course, having these huge companies, mining companies that are coming in and doing then, of course, large portion of the mining, but also looking at how we can support the sustained livelihoods of artisanal small-scale mining, where working conditions also meet a certain level standard.
Yeah, thank you.
So,
I think that's...
And of course, I'm sure that dialogue and how then the unions are working in both of those areas is of course also important to consider.
Brilliant. Thank you so much. I think you're doing an excellent job of really bringing these challenging issues to life. So thank you. I'm going to hand back now to Melissa to close up today's session. But thank you to all our panelists for sharing your insights. We really appreciate having you with us today.
Thank you very much for organizing.
Melissa, back to you.
Thank you. And thank you, George, for this seamless moderating. And thank you for the panelists for being here today. It was really insightful. If you thought, oh, this is really interesting and I want to know more about this topic, that would be great. That's great, because we did develop a full report for you to review. If you want a quicker reader, we have developed also a 2-pager. Also, as part of the purchasing practices work, we also have developed a common framework for responsible purchasing practices in manufacturing industry that will be available in 4 languages: Bengali, Hindi, Mandarin, and English. And yeah, if you want to have a more deeper look at the ETI's human rights due diligence framework, you can find that on our website. Just to conclude, a few key messages of today. What came out was like building trust with suppliers through transparency and long-term partnerships. You don't really need perfect traceability to get started. The risk of not starting are far more higher. And HRDD is not about like ticking boxes. It's really about bringing positive change to working conditions and our supply chains. And bringing positive change in supply chains is only possible when we include right holders in decision-making. Then one more time, thanks to the panelists. If you want to reach out to any of us, here are our email addresses. And then thank you very much for joining us today. We're running more ETI webinar insights series. The next one will be on responsible purchasing practices, driving change in manufacturing industries, which will happen on the 7th of May. Then want to thank you all for joining today, and have a very lovely weekend ahead.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
I think I answered the questions that were asked to me directly, Melissa, but let me know if there's any other questions you want feedback on. And
yeah, we'll have a look at the questions, and then we can share.